Hi, I'm standing in Benjamin Banneker Field, which was named after a descendant of slaves who became one of the most noted mathematicians and astronomers in history. In 1985, it was named to the Register of Historic Places and soon would become the location of another historic event. On May 25th, 1991, I stood on this field with hundreds of other Black gay men and women who came together to raise funds to fight HIV/AIDS in DC's Black gay community. The first DC Black Pride was also a celebration of unity and pride. It took root in DC, but spread across the nation and now the world.
Black Pride came into existence because of AIDS, the need to raise money for AIDS and not to have a party. And I want to always make sure that it's the case, because what is happening now is that some people are trying to forget that it happened, and also that AIDS happened, and also some of the younger people don't remember. They didn't see it.
Through it, right.
They didn't see what we saw. They didn't see the decimation of their friends who were young and lovely 1 month, 2 months later they looked different, and 6 months later they looked different, and by the time they died, they were no longer young and lovely.
Yeah.
But I don't want us to forget that, because I do believe that if we forget the past, we're doomed to repeat it.
We were all members of a small not-for-profit here in Washington called Best Friends of DC. It's a group that was founded in the Black gay community, designed to provide emergency financial assistance to people who were living with AIDS. We really did what they needed to have done. So it was meeting unmet needs, all the way to helping family with burial finances. So increasingly, as the epidemic got more serious and there was more of a challenge to meet the need, Wellmore Cook, who was kind of our patriarch and the person whose house we used to have our meetings and kind of kept us pulled together, he approached Theodore Kirkland and myself and said, you know, we need to do something more.
Most of the prides were started because there was difficulties with the community pride. They felt the community prides weren't being reflective of their duality of being Black and LGBTQ.
Okay.
And there was a lot of accusations of racism in a lot of cities, like Philadelphia in particular was like one city I can think of, where there was a lack of inclusion or outreach and diversity in the Philadelphia community pride, so the Black pride people started their own, which is what Black people do. When we can't join something else in the majority culture, we form our own institutions.
The first one was put together in like 3 months. It was a phone thing, call people on the phone. We want to have this event, what do you think about it? We said, okay, everybody jumped on board and said, we need to do this.
One of the reasons that they chose Memorial Day was that, I think it was in one of the books that Elian Harris wrote, he talked about that if you were in the life, playing in the life, doing whatever, that the place to be in this country for gay life or fun life or whatever was DC for Memorial Day. We weren't sure how many Black people, Black gay people, Black in the closet people, whatever, would show up for this event.
Right.
But what it was based on was that if we didn't get a lot of people to show up, because still there was an atmosphere that I think that people that always were not out like they are now. And so people were very cautious about their life,
right,
and who knew it and who didn't know it. And so the rationale was that if we do a Memorial Day weekend and we can't get a turnout from the Black community, people who are coming from out of town, they would probably come.
DC was the place to be. By the 70s and early 80s, it had become known as Chocolate City. And in the gay community,
DC probably had the largest Black gay contingent in the country living here. You had it in terms of professionalism. You had more doctors in the city who were probably black and gay. You had more lawyers. You had more consultants. You had more accountants. You had more construction, well, you name it.
And black folks in the city were rising to the top in education, politics, and government. And the gay community was beginning to demand a seat at the table.
I started noticing the change back in the late 70s when our leadership, city government leadership, became really open and more supportive of it. It's been a progressive city to be that open in support of gay issues. I was so proud of Marion Barry when he first got elected. He met with a whole group of black gays and lesbians only. And he said, you know what? He said, I don't have any problem you being gay or lesbian, whatever. He said, if you want to work for city government, you can come. As long as you do a good job and make me look good, you can stay.
After Marion Barry, I challenged the community back in 1982, and we actually saw a group that was formed to support his reelection of black lesbians and gay men and bisexuals. The mayor reciprocated, returned the favor, started to appoint black gays and lesbians to boards and commissions in I would say significant numbers.
Socially, the club scene was electric. Places like Bachelor's Mill and the Clubhouse were packing in crowds night after night. But something insidious, frightening, and deadly was attacking the gay community, and it was hitting the black LGBT population hard.
There was a thriving black gay community in the 80s.
Okay.
And then what happened?
The long and short of it is that HIV/AIDS came through and sort of wiped it out. Most of the people that I know of in my generation died, who were black and gay.
The community was struggling with a lot of stigma. There were a lot of people who were deeply in the closet about their HIV. And because Wellmore and because Theodore really had a lot of connections in the community through the bars and through the social clubs, they would hear about things. And then we have other members like Chuck Hicks in Best Friends of DC. And there were a lot of people that were able to kind of through the grapevine hear about people having problems, and we were able to assist them without it becoming a public thing. And the discretion at the time was critical for a lot of people because they were trying to hold on to their dignity.
Right.
I had come here in 1974, in the height of the disco era, and everybody was dancing around and everybody was partying. And then something happened in the early 80s, and all at once our friends started to get sick. By some mysterious disease that did not really have a name yet. People were struggling, nobody understood exactly what happened. It was later declared a curse, all kinds of things. People and churches did not know how to respond to it at all. The black church in particular could not understand it in the framework of their theology, so they just completely neglected it or just denied it existed. And so people were scattering about trying to continue to live for that 18 months that they lived.
Wow.
I remember going to a funeral 3 times a month of somebody I knew.
All of the guys I used to hang with back in the early 80s, there's like 20 of them, only one is left.
Wow.
One. It got to the point where I was going to a funeral just about every week.
The numbers were shocking. According to the DC Department of Health, beginning in 1983, the number of gay black men being diagnosed with HIV began to rise dramatically, and with it, the number of deaths.
Forgive me for asking you this, but
Sure.
Could you pause for a minute and really think about what that really felt like when people were disappearing like that, and and what the individuals went through when they were sick, couldn't work, and just struggling to get from one day to the next.
So, basically it was hell, and it was the kind of thing where you couldn't talk about it because people didn't talk about gay things then. It was still against the law, the whole bit. Like I said, it was horrible. Your friends just start, and in the beginning they all started dying of pneumonia, and I don't want to say all, but a friend would die, and these are like people young, in their like 30s, right? A friend would die of pneumonia, then you hear about another one, then you read about this gay cancer in New York City, and then it's like, okay, so someone has it. And first it would be your white gay friends who had it, and then suddenly it was your black gay friends, and no one knew what caused it. You couldn't talk about it because, again, you know, we were closeted, somewhat. And you didn't quite know what was happening. Meantime, the society was freaking out. Once it became obvious that there was something really wrong going on, everyone was afraid. No one knew what to do. Doctors didn't know what to do. That was when they would examine you wearing a moon suit. You know, that was when people were in the hospital and nurses would be afraid to go in and bring them food, so they would leave the food by the door, and the person would literally starve to death unless a friend came by
to feed them.
To feed them. You know, I mean, it's like, that's the kind of madness it was. People started walking around the streets with like lesions because they had kaposi's. And so it was like, just all this, and then the religious community started saying that it was a curse and it served us right. So if you didn't feel better about yourself before, you definitely felt better about yourself now. And you were afraid, and you couldn't say anything.
Was the core reason the need to raise money for black people suffering with AIDS, or was the core reason the kind of counterbalance to capital pride?
I think both, but more or less it was to raise awareness and money around those living infected with HIV and AIDS. Unfortunately, there was nothing in place, you know, there was nothing. So we needed to make sure that we were dying in alarming numbers, and people were not going to the very few centers that went around. People of color weren't going to Whitman Walker because, unfortunately, Whitman Walker, how are you going to just treat those who are ill but don't understand all of the conditions that come with a person of color?
We were told very clearly by a lot of people, well, we think what you're doing is okay, but you will never get people to come out to Banneker Field in the middle of the day on Georgia Avenue. It's not that kind of town. You should know better. You're from here. You're just going, it's not going to happen. And we'd like to help you, but we really can't risk being a part of something that's going to fail as dramatically as this is going to fail, because you know, people are just not going to participate. And so that was the backdrop of what we were dealing with. And we thought they were wrong, but we didn't know they were wrong. And so we pushed forward in the hope that at least we would have a decent turnout for the first one, and we'd be able to raise resources, and it would build. And quite frankly, any resource that we were able to receive was more than we had. And we were in that much of a crisis in the community that it didn't seem to matter how much of a success it was. We really did just need to start this, and the awareness that it would create and the resources that it would create just seemed worth it to us.
What was happening during that time, the cities were getting money to programs for HIV, but we felt a lot of the money wasn't coming to the people who most needed, the black community. So we were advocating for more city funding going to black organizations that could provide services to persons living with HIV, which really was none at that time. So what happened was that Black Pride was started as a fundraiser to raise money to support those organizations. At those times, those organizations were just developing, and they were very small, like Us Helping Us. They were very small. They probably had a budget of 3,000 or something like that. They were very small organizations, and the city wasn't funding them. So we decided that, you know, we needed to do something. We were doing the fundraisers in the club, but we really needed to do more, something big, whatever, to raise more money to support the black community in terms of HIV.
So what that very first Black Gay Pride gave people who had that type of orientation an opportunity to be among like people. The weather was wonderful. It was at Banneker Field. There you had vendors that were selling things. The entertainment was wonderful. And it was just so successful that they said, we have to do this again. So.
And I was one of the people there that day. It was a wonderful day, very uplifting and affirming.
Yes.
So I'm so very happy that it continues.
That first DC Black Pride was a great success, thanks in part to the hard work of organizations like Best Friends.
So you have your board, the mission is to raise money. What happened?
Well, we got started, and I think the more we went to different places. We went to different clubs, we went to different organizations, some churches, and we made a plea.
So what was the organization called at that time?
Best Friends.
Best Friends, okay.
Yeah, Best Friends had lent Pride $5,000, and they had spent their money and they didn't have any money. I went to Jim Graham, and I asked Jim Graham.
And Jim Graham was at Whitman Walker.
Yes,
right.
And I asked him for some money, because I told him that we needed to put some ads into paper so that people would know that Pride was going to happen. And I think it was $1,500 or something like that he donated. And we put an ad in the Blade, we put an ad in City Paper, we put an ad in, I think, the Washington Informer. And what that did was that it didn't look like it was a hearsay or, oh, there's a group of people giving you a little handbill or something. Right. But this was, hey, this is legit. They got it in the right papers. You know, they got it going on.
Right.
And so people came, and it was the first Pride in the world, Black Pride in the world.
By the mid-90s, progress was being made. The rate of infection was slowing, and people with the disease were living longer. But the battles were far from over.
What issues are you dealing with that your predecessors like Wanda Alston was dealing with?
Wanda Alston was my mentor, my very good friend, and she had this exact same position when she was killed. So Wanda at the time was fighting for, we did not have marriage equality. Marriage equality wasn't even a thought. We didn't, to this day, I'm still shocked that we have marriage equality. Right. She was talking about domestic partnerships and civil unions. At the time, people wouldn't even let you use the word marriage.
Right. You couldn't visit your partner in the hospital.
You couldn't visit your partner in the hospital. You couldn't have any say in how a funeral was going to take place of a partner if you weren't legally sort of set up to do so. And so wills were really important. And what happened when Wanda was killed, her partner did not have a say in how she was going to be memorialized. And so the community really rallied around that. And one of the things that I did is start a nonprofit called Women in Life Association, and we started a program called the Wanda's Will Project, in which we brought in attorneys to work pro bono and teach the community the importance of having a will. It was always sort of like, don't let this happen to you. Not only that, looking at what Wanda faced and what I face now, we've come light years. Still, there are challenges, right? She was fighting for domestic partnerships and civil unions. She was fighting the religious right, which was coming hard at the LGBTQ community. My challenges are homeless LGBT youth. Let me make sure that I'm getting them off the street. We put them into emergency shelter, then we put them into transitional housing, and then permanent housing. So I'm really, I think I'm really blessed to be able to help so many people in that way.
I work with the Wanda Alston Foundation, and we provide up to 18 months of shelter to homeless LGBT youth. I think in my work with homeless youth, there is a lot of challenges. First off, over half of homeless youth in DC identify as LGBTQ. That's a problem in DC, but it's also a problem in most major cities across the nation. We have young folks that are coming out earlier, being rejected by their families because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and those folks remain very, very vulnerable in our community and are finding themselves homeless and without education to find jobs to support themselves and continue to be extremely vulnerable. They've also experienced a great deal of trauma. And really, there's still a lot of stigma around mental health and mental health care. And so sometimes that trauma goes untreated, and it presents itself in ways in which prevents young folks from being able to sustain livelihood, either sustain jobs or stay in school or any number of things. So they continue to be vulnerable. unable to find good jobs or to find a place to live, and find themselves in very compromising situations, and sometimes sleeping on the streets, sometimes couch surfing, sometimes sex work so that they can survive.
What issues were alive in the 90s associated with DC Black Pride that are still issues today?
I think HIV/AIDS is an issue. I think it's a different lens. Back in the 90s, there were very little medicines and very little health care and very little government intervention. So people were becoming impoverished when they became ill. Many became homeless. There were very little legal protections. I think now that has been resolved for the most part, especially a place like DC that's so progressive. But we're still getting people infected.
Right.
And it's a preventable disease, and there's medicines that prevent you from becoming infected. I think there's transgender issues which were not talked about back in that time as much, but they were present.
Right.
And transgender members of our community were always around. They were always part of our community, but they were not giving any time to express themselves or allow the space to give themselves a voice. And I think nowadays, transgender men and women have an opportunity to have a voice, and especially in prides, and only because we have become more intentional about giving them a voice. But there's still a lot of economic issues and a lot of health issues and social issues that stigmatize transgenders now as they were in those days. But there's a greater chance to remove the stigma by being visible. I think youth issues are still critical back in those days. Homelessness of youth, with the cost of housing and parents still throwing their kids out, especially the transgender kids, out in the streets. So we still have a homeless problem. I don't know if the problem is greater now than it was then. I think it's more visible.
Regardless, that struggle for survival, acceptance, and respect impacts the transgender community especially hard.
The challenge was being different. When I was 12 or 13, Mom laid clothes out for school, and I put on the girl clothes and did not put the boys' clothes on. And ultimately that led to my mother feeling that there was something wrong and taking me to the old children's hospital, having me examined to try to figure out what was going on. And ultimately the doctor made a decision that, well, we could give your child, some male hormones to balance his genes, and that might be the fix. And my mother, being religious, opted and said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll let God fix them. But ultimately, the doctor did tell her that based on me having more female chromosomes or genes, I would ultimately be more feminine and eventually wear female clothes and may even be in relationships with men. And he said by the age of 15, but actually it was by the age of 14, I was fully transgender.
Okay.
Or what we call transgender. There was no transgender in those years.
Didn't have to work
it was
for
just gay.
It was just gay,
yes.
Right.
I wasn't passable when I worked construction. I transitioned on my job, and that's a job that is really hard to transition on. I let them know my story. I'm like, look, if you really want it and this is what then you can go out and get it. You're just gonna have to fight for what was yours.
Right.
Like every day wasn't easy, but I kind of like worked it out so that I was educating the people that I was working with as well as them learning me. Right. They were already accepting them because when I worked there, they thought they was getting a dominant lesbian, but then I transitioned. They was like, okay, what's going on? Because I started getting the fuzz and everything. So I laugh every time I tell the story because their faces was, I wish I could have had a picture or a video because it was just, because when I came on, they were working, and the next thing I know, I just feel everybody just like they in slow motion and like stop, you know what I'm saying? But no one wanted to ask me any questions, and that was the beauty of it, because they felt like if I asked the question, what, right. So no one asked the question.
Right.
But later on, one of the superintendents, he came to me and asked me, he was like, "What do you want to be called?" And I told him. So yeah,
but you're
I know it's some people that can't have that experience, but what I tell them is, to keep on fighting. It gets better.
Right.
Some of the barriers, and they're unique like anybody else. There's housing, there's substance abuse, there's mental health, and all those things, and public subsidies. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we are a very unique population, and there's just not a lot for us. And that's why my new organization, Empowering the Transgender Community, that is our goal and our mission, to get about and open up affordable housing for individuals who are transgender and otherwise in the community.
DC Trans Men Rising is a support group that I founded. It came about when I saw that there wasn't any safe spaces for trans men to go to, especially trans men of color. And I opened up my home, and that's where we have our meetings. Okay. We have it like every fourth Sunday, and we have potlucks. And I didn't want it like in a clinical scene, because I wanted people to relax. Mm-hmm. And whenever they talk about their issues, they can, feel comfortable and feel like they're at home. And, and that's the kind of space that I wanted to have. So
we know that you've worked in construction for 11 years. I know also that you're a minister.
Yes, I'm a minister at Bethel Christian Church under Pastor Darren Phelps.
How's that going?
It's going well.
It's been a couple years now, right?
Yes. I love my church. I love my, I call him my dad sometimes, because he gives me the ultimate advice. But what I love about him is that he allows me to do my ministry, which is helping out the community and going to different protests and different conferences and stuff like that. And as a trans man who is HIV positive, openly HIV positive, I do work there too. So trying to educate what's going on within the trans men community with HIV.
The needs of the trans community is so important, and I think that realizing that there are needs around trans people that are different from gay men and gay women. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to come together to understand and begin to dialogue, but unfortunately sometimes leaders forget. So that's why Trans Pride was formed, to celebrate that, the fullness and the richness of the trans community. Mm-hmm.
Nearly 3 decades since that first Black Pride, the gay community has some victories to celebrate. Marriage equality is the law, and more gay couples are having families.
You and your partner, Christopher, have been together how long?
16 years.
16 years. That's wonderful. And you have 3 children.
Yes. The oldest is 4, then we have a 3-year-old, and we have a 2-year-old.
Okay.
So I entered this journey because I love kids, and there's so many kids that don't have homes, and that by giving them a home and a stable family, it helps them succeed, and I'm giving back. I wanted to have a child that looked like me, but looking at the number of kids that are here in DC, that parents that are on drugs, I felt the need to do that. And so we started the process, and then Child and Family Services told us that we should go through the foster care rather than just straight adoption, because we had been on a list for about 2.5 to 3 years because we wanted an infant.
Right. Have you had the awkward interaction with somebody who sees a family with 2 dads and has questions for you?
No, not really. I mean, I think this day and age is not a taboo. It's normal.
What would you recommend for other LGBT people who are considering adoption or fostering even?
To really think about what their journey wants to be. I mean, before we started this, we went to HRC. They had kind of an LGBT session on like how to go about starting your own family. We went to Rainbow Families, which is another LGBT organization, to talk about like adoption and all that. And we also went to other, like the Meyer Foundation, some other organizations to see exactly what was the best fit for us. And we just felt like CFSA was the best option for us.
For many who have long been in the forefront in the struggle for LGBTQ rights, the work is not over, especially as it impacts youth and elder care.
Some of the work that I focus on, being in a university setting, is looking at creating safe and nurturing spaces on our campuses. Okay. I've joined with Beverly Guy Sheftall down at Spelman College, and she runs the Women's and Research and Resource Center, and we have formed an Audre Lorde Baird Rustin collective. Okay. bringing together HBCUs to address some of the problems that are facing our young women, making sure that they're heard and not made invisible on campuses, dealing with intimate partner violence. So sometimes we talk about that in terms of our heterosexual brothers and sisters and do not address the needs of same-sex couples. And that's an issue that we've seen on our campuses that needs to have attention put upon it. And also making sure in our curriculum that we see the voices of Black lesbian writers and theorists to help inform the education of our students and to make sure that they're seen. I think coming out of invisibility is something that's very important.
Our facility is small, as you mentioned, but we have been around for 10 years and we have helped hundreds of homeless youth. We have a space that accommodates up to 8 individuals, and we continue to work at capacity in keeping folks in the process and in the facility. There are 2 other organizations in the city that also provides beds to LGBT homeless youth, and that is Smile, and I believe they have 12 beds as well, and then Casa Ruby, which has both emergency low barrier cold weather shelter beds and beds set for up to 18 months as well. So between the 3 organizations, we still have significantly less than 100 beds for all of these youth that really need support and services.
When did you start thinking about LGBT elder care?
The short answer is when I became an elder. I'm trying to really embrace that, Marvin, that I am an elder,
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think it began when folks started saying, young people started saying, yes, ma'am.
How about that?
How about, yes, sir. Are you getting any of that?
Absolutely.
So I started embracing that. My dad got really ill, and my dad was a middle-class guy, had 2 pennies to rub together, and he went into a nursing facility. He went in continent. He had me and my wife and my siblings, his grandkids, to come and check on him, his own wife. But we pulled him out, and he was incontinent. And he was in one of our good facilities. Which it's nothing against the facility. This happens over and over again, time and time again. Nursing homes and retirement homes just kind of need to be revamped in a way, so that people won't say, don't put me in a nursing home. Right. If as they stand, don't put me in a nursing home. But I'm trying to change that culture of nursing home being sensitive to us as LGBTQ, SGL, same gender loving people, so that people don't go back in the closet, which is happening over and over again because it's just too hard to be old and gay.
And black.
And black. And female. And with a disability. People that are working, they don't have time to do all that stuff. You just old. And so we just need to check that and do some cultural competency training.
And Ballroom is thriving in the Black and Hispanic LGBTQ communities.
The House of Garçon is a family, but it's also kind of like a gay fraternity. Well, fraternity is not actually a great word because we have male and female. So I would say an organization that competes in Ballroom. Ballroom is something that started in the 60s and 70s. Back then it was called the Harlem Drag Balls. Ran predominantly by drag queens that competed in a safe space, almost kind of think of a kind of a beauty competition at the time. And it evolved over time in the 70s and 80s to include more male figures, I don't want to say male person, but male figures that competed in various categories for cash or trophies. One of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to start a house that did advocacy and ballroom. In the past, a lot of houses just did ballroom, but they weren't really engaged in the community. And in the 70s and 80s, that was understood because we're going through these rights. We're still trying to identify ourselves. So Ballroom was a safe space, and we just focused on that, coming out and just competing. So that made it was a little different. But now in the 2000s, a lot of those battles have been fought. There's still ways to go. So it's kind of a way what I call the give back approach.
Okay.
You know, we can compete, but we want to give back to the community. Some of the issues aren't there as they were before. So it's like, how do we take the knowledge that we have from the 80s, older people who have been through the struggle, who've been through the HIV onslaught right there, in the AIDS onslaught in the 80s, that are still around, that can give guidance, education, job training, to kind of get that in the community, and for the next generation say, hey, we're more than that, we can give you the support to do that.
Can you be more specific about what would attract somebody to Ballroom today? What would bring somebody out to join a house?
A lot of things. Primary, usually what people want to do when they join a house, usually there's a self-validation that they're looking for.
Okay.
So someone in the community, you may have a person of trans experience. They say, well, you know what, I want to join a house because I want to walk realness. And when you hear that, you know, they want to see if they can pass within the community. So that's usually the first thing in there. Or someone says, hey, I want to walk face. So I want to be validated that I have face, that I am good looking. You have those. Or I want to Vogue. I want validation that I can perform, that I can do this. So it's usually that validation part. Then there's also that you get people who want a sense of family.
Right.
They came out, their family doesn't know or their family doesn't accept, so they want to be around people that can support them, that can engage with them, and provide them all the necessary things that they may need.
Impulse Group is a social and entertainment-based HIV advocacy organization that uses entertainment and social events and edgy marketing campaigns as the vehicle to educate people about the HIV epidemic, as well as a host of other health disparities that are impacting the communities that we serve. One of the things that we actually had at town was our charity drag showcase, where we crowned our drag queen of the year, but all of the tips that are raised went to establish a drug rehabilitation support services fund. Okay. So it will pay the co-pays for people who are struggling with drug addiction and they want to get into rehab programs, but oftentimes these programs, many of them are covered by insurance, but there are considerable out-of-pocket costs that may prevent someone from getting treatment that they need to overcome an addiction to crystal meth, which is a huge issue that's occurring within our community that we're just not hearing a lot about. You know, we're now hearing nationally about opioids, but communities of color have been impacted by the opioid epidemic for years, particularly here in Washington, D.C. And so that impact also happens within the LGBT community and the Black LGBT community. And when you're standing at those intersections, oftentimes the barriers to getting the help that you need can be insurmountable. So at that event, we were able to raise over $5,000 to help establish that fund, and throughout the year, we'll be raising funds.
So when I was coming out, they hadn't named AIDS yet. There was a lot of bad information, no information. People were scared. People were dying. When you were diagnosed, it was pretty much a death sentence. You know, few people have survived from those days, but you know, it was a death sentence for most. What's the attitude toward HIV/AIDS now with the millennials?
I would say it's mixed. There was a study that came out from that CNN released, and while I can't remember the exact statistics, it basically concluded that you know, many millennials are not getting tested for HIV as much as they're supposed to, and it's a combination of apathy, but also you know, primary care providers just simply not making the ask or including that as a part of standard care. So there's a variety of factors on why you know, people have the opinions that they have about HIV.
Where is HIV/AIDS hitting hardest?
It hits a couple of populations pretty hard. So one, the age group population, youth, specifically LGBT youth, between the ages of 14 and 24 are one of the fastest growing groups that are becoming newly diagnosed as HIV positive. In addition to that, young Black gay men, but Black gay men in general, have long bared a disproportionate burden of the HIV epidemic. Recently, you know, the CDC made some very shocking news when they admitted that based on projections, 1 in 2 black gay men would become HIV positive within their lifetime. You know, we're talking about half.
It was 1 in 3 or 1 in 4?
It was 1 in 4 at one point, but
not that long ago.
Not that long ago.
So
and some researchers like Greg Millett at AMFAR would argue that this is not anything new, that the statistics were showing this from even the 90s, but nobody was paying attention.
So you'd expect that the trend would tail off, and it's like it's doubled down or tripled down.
It has doubled down or tripled down because we have not made the investments in health infrastructure in communities of color. And in addition to that, you know, the homophobia and the transphobia that many Black LGBTQ people experience does nothing to help the HIV epidemic. And so when you're in a community where, and things have gotten better, but when you're in communities where churches are not accepting you, where you're getting health care from folks that are rooted in incorporating religion into the healthcare system, when the comprehensive sexual health education isn't so comprehensive because it doesn't include tactics and techniques to keep yourself safe because it's written for heterosexual people and not for LGBTQ students, it creates this environment where you can have 1 in 4 Latino gay men become HIV positive within their lifetime, where 1 in 2 Black gay men can become HIV positive in their lifetimes, where Ward 7 and Ward 8 can be disproportionately impacted by the HIV epidemic in comparison to other areas of the city. One of the things that Impulse Group has shown me is that we have all the tools. A lot of people are surprised when I say this. Even without a cure, we have all the tools necessary today to end the HIV epidemic. It's a matter of priorities. We see right now that unfortunately, you know, this current administration is making some very dangerous decisions as it pertains to funding for HIV prevention federally and globally. That can really set back the epidemic. And so we can have PrEP, we can have PEP, we can have condoms, we can have all of these different programs and interventions and behavioral interventions and all of these different awareness campaigns. But if the money isn't there to roll them out, if you're handicapping health departments and the CDC to do their job, then we aren't going to be able to get the information, and the information isn't as accessible. It's about access. It's about equity.
The International Federation of Black Pride, it was a group of 8 of us, including the DC, that formed in 1999 during Black Pride. We agreed on the name, and I went and did the incorporation and did the papers, and we had our second Pride meeting of all the Prides in the year 2000.
You reorganized the Federation to become another organization. Can you
the Center for Black Equity, the board and the leadership felt that using the word Black Pride, it narrows down what people think we do. Because we do receive funding from institutions and government to do outreach on HIV/AIDS, to do women's health, we have partnerships with AARP and other organizations to really take care of the needs of our community, the broader needs. And Black Pride is just one way of capturing the population for a period of time so we can disseminate information. And we felt we needed to focus on 3 basic areas in our community, and that's economic equity, social equity, and health equity. Those were the 3 major pillars of our community.
So, what is the way forward?
Clearly, it's a blessing that it's now a 1 pill a day treatment. But this question about PrEP, it depends. PrEP is not for everybody, but for people who really need it, it's good for them to have. Okay.
And who are the people who really need it?
Basically, the people who are very sexually active. Because if you're not sexually active, you really don't need to be taking PrEP every.
Or in a relationship where.
Yes. So, and the big question that someone has to raise is this. I remember. Let me put it to you this way. Has someone said in 1980 that government money would be going to Negro homosexuals for them to be Negro homosexuals, they would have put you away, okay? Right? Okay. The only reason this is happening is because of HIV, and that's sad, but this country never paid attention to Black men, never mind Black gay men, until HIV. Listen, we got no attention at all, Okay. So this is my point. We see what's happening in the papers with our current president, Donald Trump, in case for those of you who don't know,
Yeah,
okay?
we know.
Right? My man's getting rid of health care. Who's going to pay for PrEP? Unless you have health insurance, unless you have a job that gives you health insurance, which jobs these days don't do, who's going to have $12,000 a year for PrEP? So to put all of our eggs in that PrEP basket, I say be careful, because in 3 years, if no one can afford it, right, then
it may as well not exist.
Exactly. You see?
What we didn't know at the time about Black Pride was that it was going to have a whole variety of impacts. So I would argue that the Black Prides that have popped up all over the country, in a lot of our urban centers, the ones that have popped up all over the world, have really played a strong role in giving a number of Black gay men and lesbians the confidence to come out, to feel that they actually could walk their truth in their communities.
Right.
That then had an impact on their ability to address the HIV crises in their communities. And so I think that what you see across the country is far more awareness, far more commitment, far more resources in community than ever before. But what we still don't have in place is that persistent, ongoing education to young people who are becoming sexually active that they need to protect themselves.
There's still a lot of work to be done among people of color in terms of their attitudes towards LGBTQ people. But the fact that I was able to win and then get reelected as being an openly Black gay man, it was very gratifying to me, because it showed that the people, at least those Democratic activists in Ward 8, weren't concerned about that. And as a result of that, I was able to get more gays and lesbians in Ward 8 involved in things, run for ANCs, get involved in their civic association.
DC has the highest number of self-identified LGBTQ residents in the country. At 10%, your average place has probably 3 to 5, 3 to 7%, but at 10%, we have the largest community, because the way that they identify a jurisdiction, DC has risen to the top, above San Francisco, above New York. So I'm really proud of that, because there's a reason for that. There are no accidents. We have the most progressive policies. We have the most discrimination protections. So people will come here because they know they can live a better life. And that shows that the policies and that these laws that we're putting in place are making a positive impact on the lives of LGBTQ residents. And so the fact that I'm in the position to protect residents and lift up residents and make sure that they have access to government resources and make sure the mayor is aware of what's going on in the community is just really an honor. So I'm proud to be here.
We love our kids. We would do anything for our kids. I think it's the same as a heterosexual family that's going through the process of trying to have their own biological child, that they have to go through treatments, they have to, possibly adopt because they can't have it themselves. We're the exact same. We are adopting because we want to have kids and we want to pour into another child and watch them grow.